So welcome to everybody. Those who are here right now and also those who will look at this in the future. We are going to talk a bit about an introduction to sitting volleyball. It's really intended for anybody who just wants to get an understanding of the game. But from a point of view of this webinar, it's really geared towards England. And so therefore, there'll be a bit about how do we get into sitting volleyball within England and a bit about our refereeing. How do you get into refereeing? Okay, so I will start by looking at it. I thought I did have a bit of a agenda slide somewhere in there, but it looks like it's probably further down. So what I'm going to be looking at first is we're going to look at a bit of the history of volleyball, and that should just take 2 minutes. We'll then look a bit at the governing bodies around sitting volleyball, and I'll touch on a number of them. We'll then start looking at the rules themselves. So we'll look at the rules, the game, the differences, and what some of those mean, and why we've done some of these adaptations. And then as we wind down, we'll then talk about sitting volleyball in England. So what's our structure in terms of playing the game, and then a bit about refereeing in England, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. All right, so let's get started then. Right, so this first bit just says simply, volleyball was invented in Massachusetts. So that's volleyball itself, right? And it was really just a recreational sport that was created just to give persons a different opportunity, right? But as a result of that, what we then had was sitting volleyball, right? Now, sitting volleyball started much later than that. So therefore, we're talking about the turn of the century, right? 1900 for actual volleyball, but around the middle of the century for sitting volleyball. Now, sitting volleyball was something that was a mix between something called Sitzball, which was something created in Germany, and then volleyball, which was something in the Netherlands, right? And what they decided to do was put it all together, come up with something that would be useful for persons who are recovering. So rather than being purely about a disability, it was actually about persons who are recovering and needed something that wasn't quite as energetic as volleyball, but which allowed them to get involved, right? And so therefore, sitting volleyball became a thing and was introduced. We then started looking at, so, okay, we've got this game. How do we grow this sport? And so therefore, around about 1976, so we would have had some lead up to this, right? But in 1976, it then became a demonstration sport at the Paralympics. Now, you know, when we move from just being a sport that's outside the Paralympics to becoming a part of the International Paralympic Committee community, it becomes a very different game. People then take more interest in it, right? But at this point in time, we were talking a lot, not necessarily about sitting volleyball, but actually standing volleyball, right? So standing volleyball for persons with a mobility impairment. So therefore, probably you had a prosthesis, you couldn't move well, right? So therefore, the game is still volleyball, but for persons with a disability. And then that became moved on. And we then had, besides standing volleyball, we then developed the sitting volleyball aspect of it much more. And in 1980, so the very next Paralympic Games, sitting volleyball became a part of the Paralympic community. And it goes from there. So therefore, the next bits of it are around who is who. So in those days, the big countries were Netherlands, and whether we know it or not, Israel was actually the big team in standing volleyball back then. Okay, and we kept moving along. So 7 countries participated in 1980, and 5 of them were standing standing volleyball for disabled persons. All right. We then moved on to where we are today, right? So over the course of the next, let me see, that's 1980, the next 40 years now, 42 years, we've now grown the sport to a case where in 2020, right? So in Tokyo, we had 8 men's teams, 8 women's teams in Tokyo. We've kept that kind of a structure for quite a while now. It was uneven because I remember, I think a few years ago, it was 6 women and 8 men. It's now an even playing field, men and women, equal opportunity. So that's a part of it. So not only is it about sitting volleyball, right, anyone being allowed, it's also about male and female. So male, female, and anyone else. And we'll talk about the differences when we later talk about volleyball in England. We'll see that there's a total difference between the international requirements and our national requirements. The international requirements are governed by the International Paralympic Committee, because from a Paralympic game point of view, the game is for persons with a disability. Okay, and so we need to make that clear. As we look at our game within England, it's a game of inclusion. And so therefore, there isn't a requirement specifically to have a specific number of persons with a disability. It's open and fully open to any players. We do have some teams that are all persons who have no disability. And then we have some teams that are mixed. Okay, so we'll then talk about those things later on. So as we move from here, the other thing is that the sport is now grown, right? We talk about the sport being in 60 different nations. Now, I think that number is much higher than that now, but it's about 60 nations we had that were playing sitting volleyball. And in the 2020, and I'm going to have to correct that, 202, the 2020 Paralympic Games, we actually had about 192 athletes, male and female, right, who participated. Okay, so it's growing, I think, is the message there, right? I have put a note in here that while we are going to focus on sitting volleyball in this webinar, one of the other aspects of this sport, which is beginning to take shape, is beach paravolley, right? And so therefore, there are actually rules around beach paravolley that are on the World Paravolley website. There are some countries that are starting to take this forward. We are looking from a World Paravolley perspective to introduce this in one of the upcoming Paralympic Games. So therefore, it becomes a demonstration sport, and hopefully we can take it further. Okay, but I thought I should put that plug in there right now, but we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on sitting volleyball. All right, so that's a bit about the history, right? And then we're going to talk a bit about the introduction to sitting volleyball. Now, I did say that I'd talk a bit about the governing bodies, and I don't have a slide in here, but what we do have are a number of governing bodies depending on where you come from. The World Organization, WPV, World Paravolley, is the branding and the name under which the global body runs. From a Europe perspective, Paravolley Europe is the governing body in Europe, and then you start getting the countries under that. So in our case here in England, that would be Volleyball England. But it should also be noted that though World Paravolley is the governing body globally, there is a very strong relationship between World Paravolley and IPC. IPC standing meaning the International Paralympic Committee. The International Paralympic Committee is the governing body for the Paralympic Games, right? And they work with the WPV to put on the Paralympic Games. And it's a very strong relationship. It is what drives the disability side of the sport and governs that whole aspect about number of minimally disabled. And we'll talk about that as we go through the session. All right, so let's start talking about sitting volleyball then. This is where the fun begins. This, as you'll notice, the slides have changed a bit. They've gone from Volleyball England to World Para Volley. I am using a bit of a deck that we are putting together as an introduction to sitting volleyball, which will become available globally on World Para Volley website at some time in the future. So you're getting a preview of something to come. Okay, so it's a welcome. It is an introduction to an introduction. It is developed as an introductory course, right, for sitting volleyball. And so therefore we talk about this is a course and it focuses on sitting volleyball as a sport. There are a number of other aspects which I will not get into here because it focuses on the refereeing aspect, whereas right now I really want us to focus on the sport itself, not just refereeing. Okay, so we'll talk a bit about playing. If you have questions about coaching and I can answer them, I will not pretend to be a sitting volleyball coach at this point in time or at any point in time. Okay, my involvement is primarily on the refereeing side. All right, so let's talk about game characteristics. For those of you who may not ever have seen sitting volleyball, and I'm gonna just go here to. Now, this is taken from the Paralympic Games 2012, 2020, Tokyo. It's the women's gold medal match. I'm just going to play a short bit of it here, right? So you've got China playing the USA. Oh, come on. They've decided now is the time to put on an advertisement, right? Right, and so therefore, USA in blue, China in red. For those of you who are accustomed to the sport, you'd probably have seen one of the ladies in the back court just now, probably lifting her bum above the off the court. And you're thinking, why is that possible? Well, we're going to talk a bit about the rules in a little bit, right? And why we are changing some of the rules to make sure that the game becomes an even more exciting game than it is right now. And just to give you an idea, my wife watches volleyball and sitting volleyball. She always prefers to watch sitting volleyball. She says it's more interesting. I'll leave that to all of you to decide which one you want. Let's just watch one more rally, and then I'll get back into the presentation. Okay, so yep. All right. So a little bit of sitting volleyball action. And that was from the Paralympic Games. I will go back to our presentation now, and we will continue. So let's talk about the characteristics. So the game. Nothing's changed. It is a game by two teams played on a court divided by a net. What we will see is that there's some adaptations because we're sitting on the floor, right? And in this case, the objective of the game is still all around playing the sport and winning. You have 3 hits per side, right? And that's in addition to the block. So that's no change from the normal sport that you would have seen. Block doesn't count 3 contacts after the block. And then we continue from there. The picture here is Iran. I'm trying to figure out who's on the other side of the net here in red. Looks like it's Russia, right? So at the Paralympic Games. But here, the ball is in play from the point in time that the service is hit. And the rally continues until either the ball is grounded on one court or it goes out, or one of the teams commits a fault of some sort. All right. No change from volleyball. Still all the same rules. Still all the same principles. Let's carry on. Rally point system. Exactly as it is in volleyball. The game is to 25 points. It's best of 5 normally, unless you have local regulations. The fifth set is first team to 15 must win by 2 points, right? So again, nothing has changed there. The concept of rotation, right, of players still applies. You have 6 players and they rotate around the court in a clockwise direction. So every player serves, every player comes to the front court. We'll talk about that special person who is in black on the screen here. That's the libero player. Like volleyball, the libero player only plays in the black court. So no difference there. We're still playing volleyball, right? Good. Let's carry on. So now let's start looking at some of the things that we've done to adapt. So one of the things that's being applied, and it's a principle both for volleyball and for sitting volleyball and beach paravolley, we are trying to make the game more interesting for the players and more entertaining for the audiences. Okay? It's not a game just for the players. It's not a game for our referees to be blowing their whistles. It's not a game for the coaches to say, this is what's going on. It is a game that is a spectator sport. It is an entertainment sport. And that has got to be one of the main principles if we're going to get persons interested in this sport. But we do have all these different persons interested, commentators included. All right, so let's carry on. The rules are also being adapted. We have changes every few years. And the rules are there for a number of things. They're there to allow for better play. And by better play, I mean more exciting play, right? Allowing the players to do what they do best. And that is to display their skills, getting around the court, getting to balls that we think are impossible. That's what it is. More importantly, it creates a better structure so coaches can actually develop strategies, right, and tactics that will make it interesting for them and for their players. But we also have the aspect that's related to refereeing. The course, as I said, was developed for referees. So there is a relationship between the rules and our referees. The rules are intended to allow our referees to make better decisions. We have to develop the referees so that they understand the rules and can apply them. Okay, so here we are taking everybody into consideration. Rules aren't for one person, the rules are for all of us. Okay? Volleyball itself is a very competitive sport, and this hasn't changed because players have a disability. I remember when I first started refereeing, back in, I think it was 2006 or something like that, in preparation for the 2012 games here in London. And I turned up not knowing what to expect. And I remember being in a changing room, sitting down and looking next to me and almost saying, hello, because I saw a pair of legs right next to me and thought it was a person. And when I looked around, there was no one there. It was just a pair of legs. Somebody had left their legs in the changing room. And I thought, wow, wasn't expecting that. Okay, so there are different things to think about. And then you have to think about these individuals who are putting on a spectator, right, an entertainment value spectator sport. They're athletes first, right? When we get to your national leagues, your nations leagues, you will find that it's probably more inclusive. But when we get to the level where it becomes an entertainment spectacle, Paralympic Games, World Championships, etc., the individuals there are athletes first. And if we forget that they are athletes, they will take advantage of us. They will do exactly what any athlete does. They will be competitive. And we must always remember that. Athletes first. Disability second, even third or fourth. Okay? There's nothing wrong with their brains. There's nothing wrong with their minds. Okay? Let's remember that. So let's carry on. So some of the modifications. One of the modifications for the sport of volleyball is the implementation or the inclusion of the libero, a specific player that's geared towards defense, right? And so therefore, where you may have players who are highly skilled in the front court for either defense or for blocking, in the back court, you really want somebody who is very mobile and ready to go after just about anything. The libero player was introduced in volleyball, and we have taken that same initiative within para-volley, sitting volleyball, for the libero player. It doesn't slow the game down. The person flops in and out like anybody else. They're just as fast, right? And they'll get in there, okay? But it is something that is maintained and retained, okay? Rotation. Entrenched in this sport, I've touched on this before, it permits us to make sure that we've got rounded teams, right? But I did mention the libero player. So the libero player allows you to play some strategy where you can put your offensive players in front, your blocking players in front, but get your defensive skills in play in the backcourt with your libero, okay? Rotation streamlines that because it does mean that everybody has to rotate on the court. Right. Going to touch a bit about refereeing within the framework, because this is then going to help me to go and look at some of the rules and how they have been adapted. So, as we teach referees about being a good referee, it's about fairness and consistency. It's not about blowing a whistle, right? And it's about being fair to the individuals who are playing and the spectators who are watching, right? Everybody, it's just about fairness and consistency. So without the referee in the framework, you have two individuals in battle who have no mediator. So your referee steps in as a mediator and a facilitator. That's their job. That's all. Okay, let's carry on. And so as part of that, there's a bit of trust that needs to be developed between both the player and the referees. That is something that referees earn. They don't automatically get. They have to earn the trust of all the parties. I'm not going to go through all the bullet points here, but I think the last point on this, which is that a good referee will make use of the rules to make the competition a fulfilling experience, right? Not a referee's experience, but a fulfilling experience for everyone. Okay, so let's carry on. These are just some pictures, various persons. The one at the top was the, I believe that was the World Championships in the Netherlands. That would have been 2018. And the bottom picture here was the officials, the ITOs, and the NTOs from Tokyo 2012. A very interesting experience, as you may well have guessed. It actually took place in 2021. And with COVID and being in the midst of COVID, you will notice everyone there is masked up. It was a requirement at that point in time. Very different experience to the picture above where everyone is free and smiling, okay? But we had a fantastic games in Tokyo. So let's carry on. Now we really start getting into the heart of it. We start talking about the rules. We start talking about the differences in the rules. So let's start going through. Playing area is the first one. The first difference we see very clearly is the size of the court. So the size of the court is 10 meters by 6 meters. And that is differentiated with a center line at 5 meters where the net is, and your attack line, which is at 2 meters. So whereas in your regular court would be 18 meters by 9 meters with your attack line at 3 meters, you'll notice that it's slightly different here, okay? 2 meters is where your attack line is, 3 meters in the back court. I wouldn't talk too much about the space around the court because that is going to depend on whether you're doing an international tournament or whether you're just having a local league tournament within one of your local areas. Okay, so I wouldn't talk about the area around the court at this point in time. Okay, 10 by 6 is what we're really looking for here. The next thing is the lines on the court. So the axis where your net is divides the court into two, they're not squares, they're rectangles. 5 meters by 6 meters, almost a square, right? Unlike the indoor court, which is 9 meters by 9 meters, it's absolutely a square. We're slightly off here in terms of square, but just recognize 2 meters, 6 by 5. Let's carry on. So your attack line, like volleyball, it's at 2 meters, but you do have the extension of your attack line. So the attack line is extended for as far as it needs to go outside the court, all the way into the free zone. Okay, the spacing is exactly the same as a normal volleyball court, right? So they're 20 centimeters with 15, let me see, 5 centimeters lines, 5 centimeters wide, yep, and 20 centimeters from each. So a total length of 1.75 meters or 175 centimeters. All right. Carry on then. Nets and posts. You would have noticed that people are sitting down. So your net height is going to be very different. Your net height in indoor is 2 meters 24, 2 meters 43. Women 24. Men 2 meters 43. In the case of sitting volleyball, it's going to be 1 meter 15 for men and 1 meter and 5 centimeters for women. Okay, that's measured as we have done in indoor. It's measured at the center of the net, and of course, the same applies in volleyball. You have a 2 centimeters allowance on the ends of the net, so the 2 outside ends, and try to make sure that they're equal wherever possible. Okay, not much else on this one, but that's the next difference. This now shows the structure of the net. The structure of the net is also changed, so therefore your indoor net is 1 meter in depth, the height of the net, the width of the net. In the sitting volleyball, that becomes 80 centimeters. It also therefore means that you have a change in the length of your antenna. Now, I don't think it comes up on the next slide. Okay, so a few things here. Your court is 6 meters wide, right? And so therefore your net is going to be 6.5 to 7 meters long, 80 centimeters, right? And your mesh is still 10 centimeter square meshes. Okay, so effectively what we've done is take off 2 of the squares at the bottom of your net, or from a regular net. Right. The other things you'll notice is that the posts are not as tall. That's just so that you can see over them. But of course, you don't need a taller post because your net is lower. All right. Carrying on. I mentioned the antenna. The antenna now is going to be 1.6 meters long. Now, the reason for that is that we still have 80 centimeters above the net. But because the net itself is now only 80 centimeters, if you do the maths, you come to 1.6 meters. Okay? We've shortened the antenna by 20 centimeters, but we haven't changed the amount of it that is showing above the net. Carrying on. Yep, so this talks about the posts, where they should be positioned, and how tall they should be. Now, this is really specific to when we have in international games. I know here in England, we use normal courts, so your posts are much further off of the court than the recommended half a meter to 1 meter. But if you're having an international competition, this is the requirement. Your posts a maximum of 1.25 meters. Okay. So we carry on. I'm going to leave all the questions for the end because you can stack them up, pile them up, do whatever you need to do. But we'll tackle all of them at the end, right? Rather than, because I think in some cases I may answer some of your questions before I get to the end. All right, so participants and your teams. Your team, and these are looking at, and some of you may not have seen them yet, but there are new World Para Volley rules in play, effective from 2022 to 2021, halfway through 2021 anyhow, through to 2024, right? So that's the next Paralympic Games. The rules indicate that there are 14 players internationally. The important difference here from volleyball is around classification. Classification is a system whereby players are either identified as disabled or minimally disabled. The disabled player has a VS1 classification. The minimally disabled has a VS2 classification. And for international play, you can have a maximum of 2 minimally disabled, that's 2 VS2 players on your team list. Okay, so on your team list that's submitted for that game, maximum of 2. The other staff on your list is no different from the FIVB staff. That is 1 coach, maximum of 2 assistant coaches, 1 team therapist, 1 medical doctor, right? So therefore you get 5 persons on your bench besides the 14 players. Okay, now this is for international play. Equipment. Equipment is exactly, well, it's not quite exactly the same. Equipment is your jersey, your shorts, and your long pants or short pants. Okay, and that's an adaptation, because if you think of it, when you play normal volleyball, everybody has on shorts. But with a disability, we have adapted it so that teams have the option of using long trousers, long pants. I better use the English words here now. So long trousers or track pants, right? Which they can wear, right? That's an adaptation, but it's an adaptation to accommodate individuals. Excuse me. You are allowed, let me just get my voice back a bit. Right. You must have on socks, but we will allow you to play with or without shoes, right? Again, that's a choice that players will have individually. So you could have one player, and as you can see here in the picture on the left, the player who is leftmost, he's almost on his back, actually has on socks. He has no playing shoes on. But if you look at the player to his right, he has shoes on. And in the picture on the right-hand side with the ladies' game, you will find that most of the players actually have on shoes. It's a player's choice, right? And you can have it different players, different requirements within a team, okay? What is also important is that players are not allowed to sit on any thick material. In other words, they're not allowed to put padding in the back of their trousers, right? Because there are two things here. One, it gives them, if they can get it, maybe an inch or two advantage if they can get something that thick into their trousers. But the other thing is related to safety. If you have something in your trousers, you are not going to be able to feel when it is getting hot, right? And friction means that it will get hot, at which point in time you could have something that gets hot enough that it makes the material combust, at which point in time you've got a safety hazard for both the player, the individual player, and the persons around them. Okay, so nothing is allowed to be put inside of their shorts or their pants. Okay, carrying on, you will notice in the new WPV rules, players' jerseys must be numbered from 1 to 99. Okay. When FIVB were changing the rules for 2021, this was actually in their draft rules, and we adopted it within the World Para Volley rules. The FIVB have since rescinded, and they have gone back to jerseys must be 1 to 20. And I'm pretty sure that from a World Para Volley point of view, we may actually have some discussions about this. And the reason we'll, I think, have a discussion is about the technicality behind it. If we continue to use paddles, then we will not have 99 paddles for each team on the side of the court. This works if we have electronic tablets, right? And so therefore we don't need paddles, but it becomes a little bit more difficult if we are using paddles. So it is what it is right now, but we may have some discussions about it, I'm sure, when we think about logistics. Okay, so just something to note. Forbidden objects. Now, this is exactly the same as volleyball. So it is forbidden to wear objects that can cause an injury, right? You may wear bandages, but anything that may be dangerous cannot be worn, right? So therefore, that's left to the persons who are in charge of the game to make sure, and the players and team officials, coaches, it's in their best interest to make sure that players are not playing with items that can cause any injury to anyone. But you will notice, for example, the picture on the left, player number 17, red shirt, you'll notice she has an arm, a prosthetic arm. Okay, we are talking about adaptations. We are talking about players who do have disabilities. And so therefore, the tools that they need to help them with their disability are going to be allowed. So we come to the center picture. The young man in white, he also has a prosthetic arm, right? Now, while players can wear their prosthetic legs, I think in a lot of games, you will find that the players who have limbs or disabilities around their limbs, their legs especially, they will normally not play with their prosthetics because it's a lot more weight for them to carry around, right? So they'll leave the prosthetics on the side and they'll play without those. But where it's an arm, sometimes it's balanced. So in the case of the guy in white, he's using it to help him to stay upright. Okay. On the right-hand side, you'll see a very special case. The player number 3 in orange, that's a Dutch team. And this lady had a disability in her arm, and that had to do with the strength of her arm. So the only way she could protect the hand was to actually have like a paddle, right, on the hand, and she therefore was allowed to use that. Now, to be able to use I'll call it a tool like that, right? That had to be specifically given permission, right? So therefore, when you looked at the classification of the player had a need to wear that, right? So you can't have players who just decide, okay, I'm going to put paddles on my hands because it's better for blocking. No, she has a medical need to have that, okay? And that's where we talk about adaptations and making sure that people are allowed to play. All right, so let's carry on. Your team leaders. Your team leaders, your captain. The rule has changed from this year. Prior to this year, your captain had to be a player other than the libero. From this year, both FIVB and World Paravolley are allowing the libero player to be the team captain or the game captain, right? What we've learned over the years is that captains can be on court, off court, and so we do have this situation where even if it's not the libero, your captain may not be on court, or your captain may be substituted in, or your captain may actually be changing with the libero. So there are situations right now or before where the captain was coming on and off. Therefore, why restrict the persons who could lead the teams? Hence, the libero being allowed to lead the team from now. So now any one of your 14 players are allowed to be your captain, right? And that's either game captain or team captain. Okay, game captain being the person who is taking the toss, signing the score sheet. So that's, sorry, your team captain is taking the toss, signing the score sheet, and game captain is the captain who is on court when your team captain is not on court. Okay, so let's continue. We start looking now at the playing format. So let's carry on here. Right. So your starting lineup, you must always have 6 players. There's no difference there. But here is where we start looking at structure of your team now. Earlier, we said that your team is made up of 14 players with a maximum of 2 minimal impairment, 2 VS2 players. We've got a further restriction. Of those 2 minimally disabled players, those 2 VS2 players, only one of them may be on court at any one time. And that includes if that player is a libero. So here you have a situation. If you've got 5 players on court and 6 players, and one of those 6 players is a minimally disabled player, and you've got a libero who is also a minimally disabled player, then while that 6 is on court, your libero can't come in, because then you'd have 2 players, unless the libero is coming for the minimally disabled player on the court. Okay? So, to be clear, we can only have 1 minimally disabled player on court at any one time. And so therefore, if you're dealing with substitutions, you have to make sure that at the end of your substitutions, if you've got 2 substitutes that are coming in and 2 going out, then you also have to make sure that the 6 players who are going to be left on court will only include 1 minimally disabled player, 1 VS2 player. Okay? Good. Carry on. Your positions on court. Another adaptation. In volleyball, the positions on court are controlled and determined by the position of the feet of the players, right? In sitting volleyball, the position of the players is controlled by the buttocks. So the buttocks must be either in front if it's a front row player, in front of the back row players, right? Or to the left or right of the players beside them, right? Not the feet. So the feet could be sticking all kinds of directions on the court, off the court, but the buttocks must be in the right position at the point in time that the service takes place. And we'll also, from a positional point of view, if you are determining whether a player has hit a backcourt, so a backcourt player is allowed to attack the ball above the height of the net from anywhere in the backcourt, but they must be below the net in the front court. If they are attacking it above the height of the net, the buttocks must be behind the 2-meter line, the attack line. Okay? Always think. Forget the feet, they don't count. It's about the buttocks. Okay? So we can carry on. Playing actions. Now talk about playing the ball. Team hits. In the normal game, people have to jump to reach above the height of the net. And so therefore, you will never have a situation where the ball will stop being played because gravity is going to force the players to come down. The ball is going to get let go. In sitting volleyball, you have a situation, as you see in the picture, where 2 players are reaching above the height of the net. They have both contacted the ball. And if you were to just leave it there, they can stay there all day and hold that ball. Therefore, the adaptation here is that we will allow a small amount of holding, or what we call jousting, right? So therefore, the ball stays there for a split second, then you let it play. You see what happens. But if it leads to a ball being caught there, then that rally is replayed. Okay? It's an adaptation because of the differences in the physical layout of how the net is and how the persons are. Okay? We can continue then. Faults in playing the ball. Another adaptation. So therefore, lifting, it has its own signal and everything. It's what we call the crocodile. So 2 palms facing each other in front of you, and you lift them apart. But what this means is that a player is required to play the ball with some part of their body between the buttocks and the shoulders on the court. Now, we've changed the rules around this. It was very strict before. So what this young lady in blue is doing would in the past have been called a lift. But we'll see that there's an exception which has been introduced. It was introduced in the previous rules. It's been extended. Okay, let's carry forward. So therefore, this young lady would certainly have been called for lifting in the past. But if this is a defensive action. Now, if she's gotten up on her knees and crawled, we would call it. But as she's trying to dive to get to the ball, if the ball is played in a defensive action and the contact of the ball is entirely is not entirely, so therefore part of the ball is below the height of the net, then we will allow a player to dive in either the back court or the front court, right? Previously, up to 2021, the rule was this is only allowed in the back court. We have extended it so that defensive play anywhere on the court will be allowed, so that we can have some spectacular plays. There have been some fantastic dives. I don't know how this lady got to that ball. Probably borderline in terms of whether she got up and knelt or not. Different matter, right? That becomes an interpretation. But what we want to see is that players are allowed to start diving around the court. Get off the ground, whatever way you can. Keep the ball flying is the FIVB's mantra. It is also our mantra. Keep the ball flying. Okay, so we've changed things to allow that to happen, and this is one of the changes. Okay. Contact with the court. So therefore, number 14, he has actually stood up, right? Now, you can stand up between rallies, but while the ball is in play, you cannot stand. You cannot get up on your knees and walk around the court. That is forbidden. Okay? So while the ball is in play, you cannot just stand up on the court and walk around. All right? We'll carry on. Player at the net. A few more differences here. Penetration under the net. You'll notice those yellow feet coming from the right-hand side of this picture. They are well into the other side of the court. In volleyball, your positions are determined by your feet. In sitting volleyball, it's determined by your buttocks. And in terms of penetration, penetration is permitted into the opponent's space, provided that it does not interfere with the opponent's play. Right? So the key here is not that it's penetrating, but has it interfered with the opponent? In this case, it hasn't. The player is hitting the ball. The leg is not actually affecting them. Okay, so it is allowed. And it is permitted to touch the opponent's court beyond the center line with any part of the body. So even if the buttocks were to go across the net, then it would be allowed. The key thing here is you cannot interfere with the opponent's play. Okay, and we'll come to the net touch rule in a minute, which has also been adapted. Okay, so let's continue. As I said, contact with the net. Contact with the net is not a fault unless it interferes with play. Now, as we look at this, we as an officiating team will almost always call a net contact in the act of playing the ball in the top white band of the net. Any other part of the net will not be called. So therefore, you'll notice player number 16, her body is going into the net. That's not a fault at the bottom leg part with her legs, right? But if her hand does touch the top part, that becomes interfering with play. Okay? So just remember, top white band, the rest of the net is not going to be a fault unless it is interfering with play. So if your leg got hooked up in the net and pulled it down and the ball went over, then that's a fault. You've changed the shape of the net in that case. Okay. Let's carry on. So therefore, we have a number of definitions here, and the only one here that's really relevant to differences is the first bullet point. So that is touching the top band of the net between the antenna, right, is a fault if it is in the action of playing the ball or attempting to play the ball. Notice, top band of the net. The rest of it and the rest of the wording on this page are all the same as standing volleyball, right? Let me see if there's anything I can pick out here. There's nothing else to pick out of this, which is a difference, okay? So I will carry on. Service, another adaptation that we have made. So service is about getting the ball into play. And so therefore a number of things here. The server, as we said, the point in contact of a server for normal volleyball is the feet taken off in the service zone. In the case of sitting volleyball, it's about the server's buttocks being in the service zone. That is not touching the court, not being outside the extension of the sidelines, right? The server's buttocks must be outside of the court, regardless of where the feet are, or for that matter, where the hands are. So the hand can touch the court, the feet can touch the court, right? But the buttocks must not touch the court or must not be outside of the service zone, okay? Buttocks first. Right. Yeah, we'll come to another part of the service that's different when we get to playing the ball. So therefore, here are some of the faults that could be made during the service. You can't lift when you're serving. So here is the principle. Anytime you are attacking the ball, that is putting that ball over the net, you cannot lift. Okay, so that includes the service, the block, the attack. The three cases when you're putting the ball over the net, you cannot lift your buttocks above the ground. In this case, server is lifting, right? Buttocks is off of the ground. And I think there are a few more pictures that we'll come to, right? So the next instance we talked about just now was the attack, right? You are permitted to attack an opponent's service. Two parts here, just looking to see. You can either block an attack or you can attack, right? Actually spike an attack. That is allowed in sitting volleyball. It's a big change when you see it for the first time, because it normally means that a rally has gone bang, serve, block, done, right? In indoor volleyball, it will never happen because it must go over the net. You can't block it, okay? Big difference. So here are some faults in the attack hit. As I said, anytime you are attacking the ball, you cannot lift. And you'll notice in both of these pictures, right? In the picture on the left, number 10 is lifting off the ground in the attack hit. And on the right-hand side, number 7 in red is also lifting in terms of trying to get to that ball. They're trying to wipe the ball off the block, and they have lifted to get to the ball, right? So any player who is attacking cannot lift their buttocks off the ground at the point in time that they've contacted the ball. And a few more lifting pictures here. So number 7, you'll see here, has lifted, right? Notice how very easy it looks. And all the player has done is they've shifted their weight onto their arm, and that's lifted the buttocks, right? The player in white at the bottom, again, he is sliding into the attack, but he's used his arm to get a little bit of leverage, right? An extra 3 or 4 inches off the ground. And again, the player in yellow, again, they've gone into that attack, and to get a little bit of extra leverage, they've used their arm. So you notice one of the keys here, right? Anytime you see a player put their hand down, start looking. right? It doesn't mean that they will lift, but there is a possibility. Okay, let's continue. The block. It is permitted to block an opponent's service. We said we can attack it, we can also block it. So if number 10 serves and any of those blocks are near to the ball, they are allowed to block the service, right? And it's therefore the first opportunity to attack a play coming from the opponents. All right, very big difference from the indoor game. But there are blocking faults. Again, if you're blocking, you are actually trying to get the ball back to the opponent's court. So the principle applies. If I'm trying to hit the ball back to the opponent's court and the ball is above the height of the net, I cannot lift. So if we look at the three pictures here, you will notice that the players are trying to get a little bit of leverage, a bit of an advantage in their block. And in so doing, they've lifted their buttocks off of the ground. Right. The second part of the rule, which has changed, it's actually changed back to what it was before. And that is, if you lift your buttocks without touching the ball, this is no longer a fault. Okay? So therefore, if you lift, we will only be able to call it a fault if the ball has touched the block. And that is whether it's a single block or a collective block. Okay? If it's touched one person in a collective block, anybody in the block who is lifted, whether they've touched or not, is deemed to have touched the ball. And so therefore that is a fault. But it must touch the block. Okay? We can carry on. This is actually changing the rule back. Just remember that. Okay. So I've come to the end of all of the differences in the playing of the sport, and I hope that you've written down some questions. I will just touch a bit on sitting volleyball in England and a bit of the refereeing before I open it up. So we probably just have a couple of minutes before I will open it up to questions from anyone. Okay, so let's carry on then. Go on. Yeah. So sitting volleyball in England. If you are interested in sitting volleyball in England, Volleyball England website, www.volleyballengland.org. That's the place to go. And you will come to the page that I am on here by clicking on the competitions tab in the red bar at the top. If you click on competitions, you will get to this bar. And on the left-hand side, you have a small bar and it has two bits in it. One is the Sitting Volleyball Grand Prix and the other one is the Sitting Volleyball Cup. These are the two national competitions that we have in England. The Grand Prix is run over a number of days. So this year we actually had 6 Grand Prix events. They are one-day events. And then the total points for the teams are then taken into consideration. The 2 top teams will play in the Sitting Volleyball Grand Prix final, which is on our Cup final weekend. That's April 23rd. The second item here is the Sitting Volleyball Cup. It's a one-day event. It's 1 cup. And for that one day, you will play a knockout competition. It's a free-for-all. So therefore, all teams who register for the event are actually just put into a hat and you will be drawn to play against whoever you're drawn to play against. It's very interesting because you then have some very strong teams going out early on. If you happen to be 2 of the weaker teams and you get into a good side of the draw, you may end up in a final. Okay, but it's the luck of the draw, one-day competition, winner takes all. Actually, I think we might have a cup and a plate. But anyhow, one-day event. Okay, But this is the page to look at if you are interested in sitting volleyball in England. Okay. So let me carry on then. The final item that I have for today is related to sitting volleyball refereeing in England. If you are interested in refereeing sitting volleyball in England, there are a number of ways to get to qualification. The simple way is for those persons who are already referees, so those persons who have passed our indoor grade 4 course, you have to do probably about 3-hour conversion, and it really talks about what are the differences. You do a test at that point in time, and you'll become a grade 4S, which is a grade 4 sitting volleyball award. It's a theoretical award, and like all of our other grades in England, the grades above that are then determined by practical assessments. So going from grade 4S to grade 3 to grade 2 to grade 1 are all practical assessments after that. Okay. The alternative way is if you do the grade 4S qualification, then you will still have to do the grade 4 indoor course, right? Because the grade 4 sit-in course really just focuses on the differences, and you need to understand volleyball also, because all of the other rules that are not adapted are taken from volleyball. Okay, so just a bit there. If you are interested, by all means, get in touch with us through Volleyball England, and we will look at how we can get you involved. We can normally accommodate you around the Grand Prix, right? We'll use a couple of hours, do a session in the morning, get you refereeing in the afternoon, but we'll use that as a means of getting you involved. Okay, but get in touch. Okay, and so I've just put up a few websites here where you can find information. The top one there is worldparavolley.org, so that's the WPV website. The second one is paralympic.org, and it was interesting because I saw there was about a 2.5-minute video that was prepared by Paralympic Committee, which was an introduction to sitting volleyball, and it does go through very quickly some of the differences, right? I think they may have to look at some of the changes to the rules, because it was done a few years ago. I think it was probably done around the time of Rio, so around 2016 or thereabouts. And the final website here, www.volleyballengland.org, is the website to be used for all things related to volleyball in England. And that's all types of volleyball, whether it be indoor volleyball, whether it be beach volleyball, whether it is sit-in volleyball, they all come under the umbrella of Volleyball England. Okay. So thank you. That's all I have for you today. I've been talking for a very, 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 very long time. And so therefore now I am able to say that we can open it all up to anyone who has any questions. Yeah, I'm going to try and get us back to. Okay, let's try and get rid of that. Okay, so any questions? I can't see persons who are. Let me stop presenting. Yep, I can see a few persons in here. Any questions from anyone? You can unmute yourselves now. We can have a chat. The floor is all yours now. Any questions?
Question, okay, I put one on the meeting chat. It's not specifically just to do with sitting volleyball, but
yep,
but maybe Clive can add in this one. I was informed a couple of weekends ago that in the USA, the libero is allowed to serve. Are we going to be bringing this in on the FIVB and on World Para?
As far as I understand it,
so Elliot,
yeah.
Is that?
So the question here is, are FIVB or World Para Volley looking at adapting the rule to allow the libero to serve? At this moment, the answer to that is no.
Okay.
Right? Neither one of us are looking at that. I don't know whether Blake wants to come in here. Blake is from the US. He is on this session. They have adapted the rules around the libero to accommodate their collegiate volleyball system, right? And it's really about, I think, making sure that people are allowed to play, as many people as possible. Okay, so I
would say it's the collegiate and the juniors.
Yeah.
They really want to give the juniors the opportunity to play multiple roles,
Yeah.
And have as many opportunities as possible.
Yeah. Okay, so Tim, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep. Okay.
What about the two questions I sent you?
Okay. Do you want to repeat them now, because that's
Okay,
probably the
I
best
can
way to
do.
introduce them? Yep.
The first one was come to blocking, and a lot of the rules that are written for the sitting volleyball are the same as rules as for standing volleyball.
Correct.
Now, it states in that the fact that when there is a contact for a block, there has to be a part of the body above the net.
That's correct.
Seeing as most people are above the net in sitting volleyball most of the time, they have a part of their body above the net.
Yeah.
Can there be a block if the ball is below the height of the net?
Yes, they can. So therefore, the definition of the block is very simple. The definition states that at the moment of contact, a part of the player must be above the height of the net. So therefore, if you reach your arms above the height of the net, but the hit is so steep that the ball hits you on your stomach or on your leg, then it's still a block, right? So it's a player close to the net, reaching above the net and contacting the ball when a part of their body is above the height of the net. Doesn't matter what part of the body it contacts, right? If they are blocking, then that first contact is a block contact.
So even if they don't put their hands above the net, if their head's above the net and they take it as a dig, it's still classed as a block.
It is. And if you're good enough to get your head above the net in sitting volleyball, then you're really tall. If you are able to do it in indoor volleyball, then you've got a huge leap. So either way, if your head is above the height of the net, then I say, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think, Tim, you had a second question that you wanted to
The second question was, I had a game at the weekend where a backcourt player dived for a ball, and my second referee blew for it. And I wanted to let it go, but he said, no, it was not just a temporary loss of contact from the ground. Well, I believe the rules were the fact that you could go for it as long as it was a second touch. He wasn't playing an attacking hit.
So let's be careful.
I wanted to let it run.
Right. So let's be careful. It's not about a first touch, a second touch, or a third touch. Any defensive contact that is below the height of the net. And in England, we're still playing on the old rules. So in the back court, any defensive play, right, with a loss of contact of the buttocks should be allowed to play.
Okay. So that's what I interpreted it, and I looked at the rules, and there was nothing about it saying the fact that it has to be a temporary loss of contact. It just says
loss of contact. Be careful, because the new rule has extended that area. So it will move from just being the back court to being anywhere on court, right? And that means that front court players are given leeway now to dive in the front court, right? and that will be allowed to continue.
Would that be next season? We're bringing that in, or this?
From a Volleyball England point of view, it will be next season. We don't change the rules within a season normally. Okay, so yeah.
I did have one other question, which I did send you, because when I went to the Paravolley website, they only had the old rules. They didn't have any new rules. They only went up to 2020.
Okay, now you probably wondering where you were looking at the time. You will notice.
I sent you the link. On World Para. It's World Paravolley, contents, uploads, blah blah blah. Sitting volleyball rules. And
Can you see my screen? Okay, so here I have gone to the World Paravolley website. Okay, on the World Paravolley website, you will see there's a tab here called Sport. And if you come down to Primary Disciplines, you get another tab that says Sitting Volleyball. And if you go into that tab, you will then get information and links. First of all, this link is to the new rules 2022 to 2024. Okay. And you'll see that there are some other things down here like guidelines and things like that. I don't think the casebook is here, but that's something that I'll follow up on. Okay, but the rules are here and they're on this page. Okay.
Thank you much.
No problem at all. Any other questions? Oh, this is a very good bunch of folks.
We know it all.
That sounds like Rita.
I'm just looking here at whether there's anything else in the chat.
I'll say Chris has posted a question in the chat.
Yep. And it asks, when will be the next chance that we can learn to become a sitting referee? Chris, if you are interested in becoming a sitting referee, just contact me, contact Volleyball England, the office. They'll probably put you in touch with me anyhow, right? And we'll work through that. We don't have any courses scheduled right now. And we've just had the last Grand Prix. We've only got a Sitting Cup coming up. So what we can do is either during the summer we can look at, if we have enough interest, look at putting on a course for persons, or we can look at getting you involved in a course attached to one of the Grand Prix next season. Okay, get in touch with me. Right. And we haven't had any courses. So get back in touch with me, Chris, and we'll work it out around one of the Grand Prix. All right. It's only a couple of hours, so we certainly can do something for you. Chris. Yep, you're most welcome. Any other questions?
Oh God, I'll give you one more.
Don't call him God.
Okay. The rules, when I looked at them last time, Volleyball England's the rules page, the ones for sitting volleyball were different from standard volleyball.
Pardon? Not so sure I understand.
Okay, you know you have the rules, which is for testing your knowledge of the rules.
Oh, the rules. Oh, so that's the Volleyball England Academy. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is a section which is for sitting volleyball.
Yes, there is.
But all the questions were just ones copied from the standard rules.
That's probably just because, well, let's be careful because they are they are randomly generated. And what it does is it only picks a certain set of them. So therefore, in our sitting volleyball rules, you'll find that there are things related to both sitting and regular. So just try a few times.
I have tried a few times.
All of them? Okay, then
all of them are I have sent some new ones to to Nick that I took from your casebook ones that you created.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could check them and see if they would work for the questions.
Okay, I'll have a look into that because we do have some rules there that should be sitting specific.
It's where your buttocks are and things like that.
Yeah,
so
there are
I've given some multi-choice ones and some other ones because I thought it'd be useful.
Okay, then I will have a look at that. Pete Parsons is the real boss around putting together the rules are part of it, and he's done a great job. I think there was something like about 50 questions or something like that he put in relating to sitting volleyball. So I just need to make sure that they're coming up at within the right section of the rules application. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? We have probably gotten to about just under an hour and a half now. So any final words, any final questions before I wrap up in the next minute or two? Okay, it's gone very quiet. So I would like to say thank you to all of those who have attended this evening. Tim for keeping me sharp and honest with asking some questions. And I am certainly looking forward to probably getting a number of additional questions as persons who view this webinar in the future, right? So Charlotte, who has been the person who has organized this, thank you very much for setting up the Teams meeting, for getting it all out there, and for ensuring that we've got a recording of this, which we can reuse. Thank you very much, folks. And thank you very much for your participation. Okay, talk to you soon. Goodbye for tonight. Good night.